Imagine a vast anthill beneath the roots of tall grass, where life never pauses, not even for a breath. The narrow tunnels echo with footsteps, and every corridor flows with the movement of countless tiny bodies, working as one. Leaves, seeds, crumbs of food, each carried on the backs of diligent workers moving in perfect order. From the outside, it appears harmonious, efficient, even admirable. But within that rhythm, buried beneath layers of purpose and duty, lives a little ant named Rita. To most, Rita is just another worker. She does what is expected, no more, no less. From the moment she wakes to the moment she collapses in her nest, she carries, lifts, drags, builds, day after day, leaf after leaf. But inside her small chest beats a heart heavy with questions. While the other ants seem content, some even cheerful, Rita feels something different. A quiet ache, a silent hollowness. She looks around and wonders, why does everyone seem to know what they're doing? Why does this all feel meaningless to me? No one notices her pause, her glances toward the sky, her slower steps. Because the anthill keeps moving, and no one asks questions when the work never stops. Yet Rita cannot silence the whisper in her soul. Is this all there is? To work, to struggle, to repeat. Her body moves out of habit, but her spirit feels trapped, as if the very tunnels around her are closing in. She wants to believe there's more. She wants to hope, but hope is a luxury in a world where stopping means falling behind. Still, deep within, a longing stirs. A desire not just to survive, but to understand. And though she doesn't know it yet, that desire is the first crack in the shell of her old life. Something is beginning to awaken. That night, as the moon cast its soft silver light over the grass above, Rita lay in her small chamber, her antennae still and her legs tucked close. Around her, the colony rested in its quiet hum, the rhythm of countless lives paused briefly in the hush of night. But inside Rita, sleep did not come easily. Something stirred, a weight not on her back, but in her chest. She turned gently, her gaze drawn not to the earth around her but to the tiny patch of sky visible through a crack in the tunnel above. A sliver of starlight filtered through, fragile and faint, yet more beautiful than anything she had carried all day. Her heart, tired from endless toil, suddenly felt tender. The sky, so far away, seemed to listen. And in that stillness, Rita did something she hadn't done since she was a larva. She whispered. Not to another ant, not to the queen, but to something greater. Something she didn't understand but felt was always just beyond the edge of her knowing. Why? She murmured, barely louder than a breeze. Why does my life feel so heavy? Why does everyone else seem fine, while I feel so empty inside? If you're there, if anyone's listening, help me understand. There was no reply, no echo, no shining sign, only silence. But within that silence, Rita felt the soft brush of wind through the tunnel, cool, gentle, like a breath against her skin. It wasn't a voice, and yet it wasn't nothing. It was a presence. Unseen, wordless, but somehow comforting. And for the first time, her question did not feel lost. It felt received. Rita didn't know that this moment, this tiny prayer whispered into the dark, would begin to reshape her world. But as she closed her eyes beneath the stars, a subtle warmth settled in her chest, a quiet thought like a seed. Maybe something heard me. Maybe something will change. The next morning, as the colony stirred into motion, Rita rose with the others. Her limbs ached, her eyes were still heavy, but something inside her was quietly different. She didn't yet know what it was, only that the question she had whispered to the stars was still echoing gently in her heart. As she joined the never-ending stream of workers hauling seeds, leaves, and crumbs along the narrow trails, Rita noticed something unusual. In the tall grass just beyond the main path, a subtle rustling broke the usual pattern of sounds. Most ants ignored it, focused as always on their duties, but Rita's curiosity tugged at her. She turned her head. There, between two blades of grass, sat a creature unlike any she had ever spoken to. A grasshopper, tall, green, and relaxed, perched on a smooth stone, his legs crossed, his antennae swaying slowly in the breeze. He looked at her with calm eyes and a soft smile, as if he had been waiting for her. "You look tired," he said gently. Rita stopped, startled. No one ever noticed how she felt. No one ever asked. "I am," she replied before she could think better of it. "But I have work to do. There's always work to do." The grasshopper tilted his head. "Yes, but is that all there is?" Rita blinked, unsure if she should answer. She glanced back at the marching line of ants, each one focused, committed, unquestioning. That was life, wasn't it? "I don't know," she said softly. He smiled again. Patient. Understanding. "Come, sit, rest for just a moment." Rita hesitated. She knew what the others would think. Laziness. Distraction. But something in the grasshopper's voice, in his eyes, in the way the sunlight shimmered softly around him, it all felt safe. Different. And perhaps, just for a moment, that was what she needed. She stepped off the path, laid her burden down, and sat beside the stranger in the grass. In that small act of stepping away, something in her world began to loosen, just a little. The grasshopper looked at her not with judgment, but with warmth. And though no great wisdom had yet been spoken, Rita felt as if she were already learning something. Sometimes, to find the answers we seek, we must be willing to stop moving, even if just for a breath. Rita had never left the path before. Every day, from the moment she emerged from the tunnels, her world had been made of single-file lines in silent obedience. But now, under the gentle gaze of the grasshopper, she found herself listening, not just to him, but to a quiet voice within herself, long ignored. "You asked if there was more," the grasshopper said, his tone as calm as the morning breeze. "Come with me. I'll show you something you've never seen." Rita stared at him. "Where?" He turned and pointed with a long, elegant leg toward a distant silhouette. A mountain. It rose beyond the edge of the field, its peak hidden behind soft clouds. "That?" Rita almost laughed. "I've never gone that far. I don't even know what's out there." "Exactly." The grasshopper smiled. "Sometimes, to find what's real, we must step away from what's familiar." She looked back at the colony. The lines of ants were still moving, untouched by her absence. Her heart beat faster. Could she really walk away? Even for a while. "But the work, my duty." "You've been doing your duty every day," the grasshopper said gently. "But have you cared for your heart?" There was no accusation in his voice, only a strange kindness Rita wasn't used to. She hesitated, then looked once more toward the mountain. It seemed impossibly far. But somehow something inside her stirred. Not excitement, not yet, but a tiny flicker of hope. She drew a breath. "Okay," she said, surprising even herself. "I'll come." And so they began to climb. The terrain changed quickly. The soft soil of the fields gave way to patches of rocky ground and uneven grass. Rita stumbled at first, her legs trembling with every step. The mountain loomed larger with each passing moment, no longer a distant dream but a very real challenge. Her back ached, and she missed the predictable rhythm of the colony. But there was something else now too. A freshness in the air, a sense of space, a silence that allowed her to hear her own thoughts for the first time in what felt like forever. The grasshopper hopped ahead with ease, pausing often to let her catch up, always offering words of quiet encouragement. "One step at a time," he'd say. "You don't need to reach the top today. Just keep moving." And she did. Each step forward, though small, was a quiet act of courage. Each breath she took carried not just exhaustion, but also the beginning of something new. Rita didn't know what she would find at the top of the mountain, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't just moving out of habit. She was moving with purpose. As Rita climbed higher, something subtle began to shift, not just around her, but within her. The world she had always known was growing smaller behind her, not because it had changed, but because her perspective was changing. With each step, she saw things she had never noticed before. A droplet of dew trembling on the edge of a leaf, the way sunlight filtered gently through the blades of tall grass, creating golden halos, the whisper of wind as it danced between stones, not harsh, but musical. She paused for a moment, legs aching, breath shallow, and turned around. Below her, the ant colony was now no more than a tiny dot among the vast stretch of green. What once seemed like the entire universe now looked like just one piece of a much larger picture. The endless rows of duty and repetition. How small they looked from here. And for the first time, Rita felt no fear in seeing them so far away. She felt something closer to peace. The grasshopper landed beside her, nodding without saying a word, as if he had been waiting for her to notice. "It's not the world that changes," he finally said. "It's how you see it." Rita didn't answer, but the words sank deep. Maybe she had never been trapped at all. Maybe it wasn't the colony that had imprisoned her, but her own thoughts, her own belief that life could only be one way. She looked ahead. The climb wasn't over. In fact, the steepest part was still to come. But now she felt a little lighter. Not because the path had become easier, but because she was beginning to walk with new eyes. Eyes that no longer looked down in despair. Eyes that had finally begun to look up with wonder. At the peak of the mountain, Rita stood still, breathless, not just from the climb, but from something deeper stirring inside her. The world stretched before her in a vast golden silence. Rivers shimmered like silver threads. The sky wore the colors of grace. Everything was wide, open, eternal. And yet, within her heart, a quiet ache still lingered. She had reached the summit, but the emptiness hadn't vanished. She turned to the grasshopper, her voice trembling with a question she had carried all along. "Is this it? I came all this way, and I still feel like something's missing. Why does it still hurt?" Before he could respond, the wind rose. It wasn't a normal wind. It had a rhythm, a breath, almost a voice. The leaves stirred with a hush, as though the earth itself had paused to listen. And from that breath of silence, a radiant figure emerged, luminous, gentle, and full of presence. It was an angel, not in grandiosity but in calm, not in thunder but in understanding. His light was not blinding but warm, like dawn touching the soul. Rita stood stunned as the angel's voice wrapped around her like a soft cloak. "Why are you crying, little one?" She opened her mouth, and her heart poured out. "Because I try, I carry, I climb, and still I feel empty. Still I suffer. Why must life be so heavy?" The angel knelt gently, eyes deep as eternity. "You suffer," he said, "because you've been walking with your eyes on your wounds. But blessings, child, do not shout. They whisper. And you've been so focused on what hurts, you've forgotten to see what heals." Rita looked away, ashamed. The angel continued, "You asked for help, and heaven answered, not by removing your burdens, but by showing you your strength. Suffering isn't a punishment. It's a mirror. It shows you how deep your roots can go, how tall you may grow." From his hands, tiny lights fluttered, like stars set free, and they landed gently on Rita's shoulders. "Begin with gratitude," the angel whispered. "Not because your life is easy, but because your soul is strong. Your suffering has not broken you. It has carved you into someone who can rise." In that moment, Rita felt something shift, not outside, but within. A silence bloomed, soft and steady. She wasn't empty. She had simply never paused long enough to feel how full her heart already was. And with that, the angel faded like mist into the wind, but his words echoed in every leaf, every stone, every beat of Rita's small but steady heart. As Rita began her descent from the mountain, the world looked unchanged. But she was not. The same rocks, the same trees, the same winding path now carried a different meaning. What once were obstacles now seemed like silent teachers. Each step downward no longer felt like a return to old burdens, but a journey into new understanding. The grasshopper walked beside her quietly, as if knowing that the lessons unfolding in her heart required no interruption. The air was cooler now, and the shadows stretched long across the trail. Rita's legs still ached, and the climb had left her weary. But within that tiredness, there was peace. Not everything had become easy, but everything had become clearer. She stumbled once, catching her foot on a root, and instinctively grumbled, but then she paused. Where frustration once lived, a new smile took its place. She looked at the root, gave a little laugh, and said, "Thank you for slowing me down." That was the change. The world hadn't softened, but her eyes had. Her spirit had. Even the silence between her and the grasshopper no longer felt empty. It felt full of quiet companionship, like two souls walking together, not needing to explain, only to be. As they reached a bend in the path, Rita spotted the distant outline of the anthill, her old home. The place that once felt like a prison now stood like a memory, waiting to be understood. And yet she felt a twinge of doubt rise again. What if everything just goes back to the way it was? What if I return and lose this light? The grasshopper turned to her, sensing her worry. "The world may look the same, dear Rita," he said gently, "but you are not returning the same way you left. You climbed, you saw, you changed. The light isn't something you bring back in your hands. It's what now lives in your eyes. Rita nodded slowly. The descent no longer felt like the end of a journey. It felt like the beginning of a new one. A journey not to escape her life, but to live it differently. From within, with softness, with vision, and above all, with gratitude. And as they walked farther down the mountain, Rita began to hum a quiet tune. A song she didn't know she remembered. A melody not of words, but of becoming. When Rita finally stepped onto the familiar plain surrounding the anthill, everything looked exactly as it had before. The lines of ants were still there, marching with purpose, heads low, burdened by leaves, seeds, and their own silent thoughts. The tunnels still whispered the same rushing rhythm of urgency, routine, repetition. Nothing outside had shifted, and yet, within Rita, a profound stillness stirred. She stood at the edge of the colony, not rushing back in, just watching. Her heart was neither heavy nor afraid. Something within her had softened, expanded, like a lantern that had been lit and would not be extinguished by the winds of busyness. As she walked back into the anthill, some heads turned briefly toward her, then returned to their tasks. No one noticed the difference in her gait, her calm breath, the quiet smile that curled at the corner of her mouth, but Rita noticed. For the first time, her return was not a defeat. It was a continuation of her path, an inward homecoming. Soon, she spotted another ant struggling with a load twice her size. Once, Rita would have walked past, too lost in her own exhaustion. But now, without hesitation, she stepped beside the ant and gently offered help. No words were exchanged, just a shared burden carried together. And in that small act, something miraculous happened. Lightness, not in the load, but in the heart. The tasks hadn't changed. The days ahead would still be full of work and weariness. But Rita now understood something she hadn't before. It was not the weight of life that crushed her. It was the way she carried it. And now she carried it differently. Not as a prisoner, but as one who had climbed the mountain, seen the sky, and returned with vision. She didn't speak of the angel or the summit. She didn't need to. Her actions told the story. Her presence carried the echo of the wind at the peak, the warmth of the sunrise, the stillness of that luminous voice that whispered, "You are not alone." Rita returned, changed, and in that quiet change, the world around her, slowly, subtly, began to change as well. Not long after Rita's return to the anthill, something subtle yet powerful began to unfold, like ripples expanding from a single drop in a still pond. The changes within her, though quiet and invisible to the hurried eye, began to make their way into the lives of others. At first, it was in small gestures. When an ant stumbled with a load, Rita no longer passed by. She stopped, smiled, and lifted part of the weight. She didn't do it for recognition, and she didn't expect anything in return. She did it because something inside her had bloomed. A calm knowing that compassion lightens not just another's burden, but one's own soul. One morning, a young ant who had often worked beside Rita paused to ask her, "Why do you always look so peaceful?" Rita chuckled softly and replied, "Because now I look up every once in a while." The young ant blinked, puzzled. But later that day, she too looked up and noticed the sun peeking through a crack in the tunnel ceiling. And just like that, a seed was planted. More and more ants began to notice Rita's way of moving, slow, steady, unhurried. In a place where haste was a virtue, her gentleness stood out like a flower growing from stone. She was still working just as hard, but her energy carried warmth instead of weariness. When others faced frustration or despair, she listened. Sometimes she said nothing, just held space for their struggles, as the grasshopper once did for her. In that simple silence, healing often began. One day, an elder ant, tired and discouraged, watched Rita helping two others balance an awkward branch. "There was a time," he said aloud, "when we all helped each other like this." And just like that, a memory awoke. It wasn't something new that Rita had introduced, but something ancient that she had simply remembered and now reminded others of through her actions. Gratitude, presence, kindness, these were not slogans. They were lived through the body, spoken in quiet acts of care. And in time, others began to follow. A shift began to pulse through the colony. Not a revolution, not a command, just a return to something essential. A different rhythm, a different light. And all of it began with a question whispered to the stars, and the courage of a small ant who dared to climb a mountain with her heart open. There comes a moment in every journey, quiet and unassuming, when we realize the true mountain was never made of stone, never rising on the horizon. It was within us all along. Rita, once a weary worker ant burdened by questions and sorrow, now found herself resting once more beneath the familiar stars, not at the peak of some distant summit, but at the heart of the very world she once believed a prison. But it was no longer a prison. The anthill had not changed. The tunnels still echoed with footsteps, the leaves still needed lifting, the days were still long. But Rita had changed, and in her the world had softened. That, dear listener, is one of life's most mysterious truths. When we shift, even slightly, the entire world seems to shift with us. As she watched the steady rhythm of her companions, Rita smiled, not with pride, but with peace. She had not escaped her life. She had entered it more deeply and with new eyes. The mountaintop had not removed her burdens. It had revealed her strength. The angel had not erased her suffering. It had shown her the hidden gold within it. And the grasshopper, with all his gentleness, had never carried her. He had only reminded her that her own legs could climb. So often, we wait for change to arrive from outside. A better job, a brighter day, a softer world. But transformation begins quietly, like breath. It begins when we pause long enough to ask, what am I not seeing? It begins when we dare to believe that our suffering too holds seeds, not of punishment, but of possibility. Rita's story is not about becoming someone else. It's about remembering who we are beneath the noise, resilient, aware, capable of wonder. She didn't learn how to escape work. She learned how to sanctify it. She didn't avoid hardship. She faced it with fresh understanding. And in doing so, she awakened not only herself, but an entire colony. We are each, in our own ways, little ants in a vast world, carrying things we cannot name. And yet somewhere between the weight we carry and the sky above us, there is a path. It may be steep, it may be long, but it is ours, and it leads not just upward, but inward. The mountain we must climb is not far away. It is the courage to face our pain with presence, the strength to keep walking even when we're afraid, the stillness to listen to the quiet voice within us, the one that says, you are more than your burden, you are more than your fear. So if today feels heavy, if your soul is tired, remember Rita, look up, take a breath, begin again. Because even in the smallest being lies the spark of awakening, and the mountain in truth is already within you. May your steps be light, may your heart be open, and may you remember, the journey is not to the top, but to the center of your own being.